diving right in with another deep dive today. And we got some really interesting listener material to unpack.
Yeah, looking forward to this one.
It's all about the Afar people. Have you heard much about them?
I have, yeah, fascinating group. And the sources you've gathered here are perfect for a deep dive.
We've got some Wikipedia, always a good starting point, right?
Absolutely gives us that broad overview.
Right, so we've got Afars and then Red Sea, Afar Democratic Organization. Now that's the Arcedo we see mentioned a lot.
Right, and it seems like they're really at the heart of things for the Afar people today.
Definitely. And then to get a bit more into their perspective, we've even got some stuff from the Arcedo's own website.
That's great. Always good to get the primary source whenever possible.
So it looks like we're going to be covering a lot of ground here. History, politics.
For sure, identity, it's all connected.
Yeah. So to kick things off, let's just clarify, who are the Afar people? Where do we even find them on a map?
So picture the Horn of Africa, that kind of pointed tip of the continent.
All right. Where's that exactly?
So that's where Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Djibouti all come together, and that's Afar territory, smack dab in the middle of it all.
So 3 countries. That's interesting. A lot of borders to navigate.
Yeah, and we're talking about a population of nearly 6 million across those countries, so not a small group by any means.
Wow, 6 million. And they've got their own distinct culture, language, all that.
Oh, yeah, definitely their own language. Part of that larger Afro-Asiatic family, and they're primarily Sunni Muslims, gives you a sense of their place in the region.
Really interesting. So we've got the geography down, religion, language, but I'm curious about their way of life.
Now that's where it gets even more interesting. Our sources talk about this nomadic pastoralist lifestyle.
Nomadic pastoralist. Break that down for me a bit.
So think about it. For generations, they've been traversing some of the harshest landscapes.
Harsh cow.
Deserts, salt flats, you name it, really tough terrain.
Wow, I can't even imagine.
And they've adapted to it all while herding livestock, living off the land.
So they're constantly on the move.
Historically, yeah, that's been central to their identity, that resilience, that connection to the land.
It's amazing how people adapt, finding ways to survive and thrive in these incredibly challenging environments.
Absolutely. And that connection to the land. It plays a huge role in their current political struggles, too, which we'll get into.
Right, because it's not just about the past, right? This way of life, it's being challenged.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Modernization, climate change, political instability, all these factors are putting pressure on their traditional ways.
Makes you wonder how they're navigating all of that.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. But first, I think it's worth digging a bit deeper into their history.
Right, where do they come from? How long have they been in the Horn of Africa?
Well, that's where things get a bit murky. Some theories suggest they've been there for thousands of years.
Oh, millennia.
But the earliest mentions we have referring to them as the Adal, those date back to around the 13th century.
Okay, so maybe not always called the Adfar people?
Yeah, the names evolved. Like many groups, their identity has been shaped by interactions with other cultures over time.
Right, makes sense.
But there's even an earlier mention by Herodotus.
Herodotus, the Greek historian, he was writing about them.
Well, not them specifically, but he described a group in the region as troglodytes, which some think could connect to the Afar name, possibly coming from a Berber word for cave dwellers.
Hold on, cave dwellers. Now, that's an image I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, it's intriguing, isn't it? But whether that was their own term or one imposed by outsiders, who knows?
It's like their story starts with a bit of mystery.
Exactly, and it makes you realize how much history has been lost, how many perspectives have been silenced.
So layers upon layers of history shaping who they are today.
And I'm sensing a theme already here, external forces always playing a part in their story.
Yeah, I'm picking up on that too. It's like they're constantly adapting to pressures from the outside world.
It seems to be a recurring pattern throughout their history.
You mentioned the Adel earlier. What's the significance there?
Well, the Adel, they became quite powerful in the 16th century, big players in regional conflicts.
Conflicts with who?
Primarily with Christian Abyssinia, they were a major force at that time.
So this is a group with a history of military engagement.
Definitely. And how directly the Afar people, as we know them today, were involved with the Adel, that's up for debate.
So different interpretations, historians disagreeing?
Yeah, some see a clear connection. Others say it's more nuanced, shifting alliances, fluid
Right,
identities.
because things weren't so black and white back then, I imagine.
No, not at all. But what we know for sure is that this was a period of intense religious and political clashes.
And the Afar people, they were right in the thick of it.
Absolutely. And it's likely that these events, these conflicts, they had a lasting impact, shaping their later struggles for autonomy.
So history's repeating itself in a way, or at least echoing.
Yeah, there are definitely echoes of the past in their current situation.
Speaking of external forces, we can't forget about colonialism,
Hmm.
right? How did that impact the Afar people?
Colonialism. Yeah, that's a whole other layer of complexity.
Because those borders we see on the map today, those weren't always there.
Not at all. And that's where colonialism really messed things up for a lot of groups, the FR included.
How so?
Well, those arbitrary borders that European powers drew, they sliced right through the Afar people's traditional grazing lands.
So imagine your home, your livelihood, being divided by lines on a map drawn by people who don't even understand your way of life.
It was devastating, communities separated, nomadic routes disrupted. It completely upended their traditional way of life.
And that disruption, it continues to have consequences today.
Oh, absolutely. It sowed the seeds for many of the challenges they face now, their struggle for self-determination. It's all connected back to these colonial legacies.
So we've got this people marked by resilience, but constantly pushed and pulled by forces beyond their control.
It's a story of survival, adaptation, and the constant struggle for agency.
And I have a feeling this tension plays a huge role in the formation of the RSADO. But before we get there, what about Eritrea's independence in '93? How did that impact the Afar, particularly those who found themselves within Eritrea's borders?
That's a huge turning point.
Because it's not just a new country on the map, it's a whole new set of political realities.
Exactly. And imagine being part of a people whose traditional territory spans multiple countries and then suddenly, bam, a new border solidifies, dividing your community.
Putting you under the jurisdiction of a government that might not have your best interests at heart.
That's the situation many Red CFR people found themselves in after Eritrea gained independence. And according to the RSADO's own accounts, this wasn't just about a new border. It was the start of what they claim was systematic persecution by the Eritrean government.
So they're facing not only the geographic disruption of new border, but also active measures taken against them.
That's their claim, and it's important to note that we're hearing this from their perspective, but it does align with some concerns raised by international human rights groups.
Concerns
About the Eritrean government's treatment of certain ethnic and religious minorities, including those advocating for basic rights. So it's a very complex and sensitive situation.
multiple perspectives, a lot of layers to unpack.
Yeah, and it's in this politically charged environment that the Arasado emerges.
It makes sense. They're seeing their people facing these challenges, and they feel they need to act.
Exactly. So the Arasado, they come onto the scene around 1995, 1996, led by a figure named Ahmed Humd, and their goal: autonomy for the Dankalia region, a territory largely inhabited by Red Sea Afar people.
So they want self-governance, control over their own destiny.
That's the idea. They want a space where they can protect their interests, their culture, their way of life.
But they weren't just going to politely ask for this autonomy, were they?
Not exactly, no. Our sources mention armed insurgency, so they were ready to fight for it.
Wow, so they took up arms against the Eritrean government.
Yeah, and this is where things get even more complicated. They adopted guerrilla warfare tactics, launching attacks, posing a real challenge to the Eritrean government.
This is turning into a political thriller, almost.
And it didn't stop there. They also joined forces with other groups seeking change in Eritrea, becoming part of this broader coalition called the Eritrean Democratic Alliance, or EDA.
The EDA, so now it's not just about the Red Sea Afar people, it's about a wider movement for political change in Eritrea.
That's right. What began as a fight for autonomy within Eritrea escalated into something bigger, a challenge to the entire system.
It's all connected, isn't it?
Absolutely. The local and the national, the personal and the political, it's all intertwined in this story.
And I want to make sure I'm understanding this right. This fight for autonomy, it's not just about a piece of land. It's about preserving an identity.
Exactly. It's about protecting their culture, their way of life, in the face of what they see as oppression.
It's about having a say in their own future.
And for the Arazo, and for many Red CFR people, this struggle is about reclaiming control over their own destiny.
That really puts things into perspective. We're not just talking about abstract political concepts here. These are real people fighting for something they believe in.
And their story, it resonates with similar struggles happening all over the world. Indigenous groups fighting for recognition for rights.
This is definitely a deep dive with some global implications.
Yeah, it makes you think about those broader questions of power, justice, who gets to decide how resources are used, how cultures are protected.
So much to think about. And before we move on, I think it's important to delve a bit deeper into why exactly the Arasado emerged. What specific actions were they opposing?
Yeah, let's break down those grievances a bit further and see what this all means for the Afar people today.
Definitely a lot more to uncover here. All right, so we're diving deeper into the Arasado's emergence. What were the specific grievances that fueled this armed struggle?
Well, the Arsado claims a whole series of policies implemented by the Eritrean government were directly aimed at marginalizing and displacing the Red Sea Afar people.
Like what specifically?
One major accusation is land grabbing. They allege their traditional lands were seized, disrupting their nomadic pastoralist lifestyle.
So essentially cutting them off from their ancestral territories.
Exactly, severing that deep connection they have to the land. And it's not just the physical loss, it's a loss of heritage, identity.
Right, imagine being forced off the land your family has relied on for generations.
It's a huge blow, and it goes beyond that. The Arizado also claims the Eritrean government actively suppressed their cultural identity.
Suppressed, how so?
They say the use of the Afar language was discouraged, traditional customs and practices were targeted.
Almost like trying to erase their culture.
Yeah, if true, that kind of cultural erasure would be devastating for people who fought so hard to maintain their unique identity throughout history.
It's like a multi-pronged attack on their way of life. First the land, then their culture. What about their economic activities? Did those come under fire as well?
Absolutely. The Arsado argues that the Eritrean government enacted policies that directly undermine their traditional economic activities, particularly fishing and animal husbandry.
And those aren't just ways to make a living, right? They're deeply intertwined with the Afar culture.
Exactly. They're not just jobs, they're integral to their way of life, their identity.
So to disrupt them is to strike at the very heart of who they are as a people.
That's their argument. And it's important to note, these grievances weren't limited to the Red Sea of Far people.
So they saw this as a wider problem.
Yeah, the Arsado points to what they perceive as a broader pattern of discrimination and human rights violations by the Eritrean government, targeting various ethnic and religious groups.
So they were fighting on two fronts in a way, for their own self-determination and against a system they saw as unjust and oppressive.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Their struggle becomes a microcosm of those broader challenges faced by marginalized groups seeking recognition and rights within a nation state.
This is a really complex situation, a lot of layers to unravel, and it makes you wonder, where do things stand today? What's the current situation for the Afar people, both those within Eritrea and the larger Afar population across the Horn of Africa?
Well, the Afar people as a whole continue to face challenges, issues related to land rights, political representation, economic development.
And their traditional nomadic lifestyle, it's under pressure from all sides, right? Modernization, climate change.
Yeah, it's becoming increasingly difficult to maintain those traditional ways.
It must be a constant struggle to preserve their culture and identity in the face of all that.
It is, but they're showing remarkable resilience. They're navigating these complex political landscapes, advocating for their rights, finding ways to adapt while preserving their heritage.
It's inspiring to hear about that kind of resilience, that determination to keep their culture alive.
They're not passive victims. They're actively shaping their destiny, engaging in political processes, working with international organizations.
Really taking control of their future as much as they can.
And it's crucial for the international community to understand their situation, to support their efforts to build a more secure and prosperous future.
It's a powerful reminder that behind every political movement, every headline about conflict, there are real people with real lives and real struggles.
Absolutely. And understanding their stories is essential if we want to find meaningful solutions.
We can't just look at maps and borders. We have to see the human impact of these geopolitical shifts.
And the Arasado and the Red Sea Afar peoples fight for autonomy. It's just one chapter in a much larger story of indigenous groups around the world navigating the complexities of modernization, globalization, political power.
It's a story that demands our attention and our empathy.
Before we wrap things up, I think it's important to acknowledge that our sources, primarily Wikipedia and the Arasado's own website, offer valuable insights, but it's only one perspective.
It's a reminder that even when diving deep, we're only seeing a fragment of the whole picture.
So it's up to us to seek out diverse perspectives, to challenge our own assumptions, and to approach complex situations with nuance and understanding.
And that's where you, the listener, Come in. We've equipped you with this foundation of knowledge about the Afar people, their history and their ongoing struggle for self-determination, particularly through the actions of the Arcedo. But now it's your turn to explore further.
Consider this your springboard to a wider world of knowledge.
Maybe you delve deeper into the history of the Horn of Africa, or explore the intricacies of Eritrean politics, or research global movements for indigenous rights.
Or perhaps you focus on the cultural richness of the Afar people, their traditions, music, art, and how they've managed to preserve their identity despite facing so many external pressures.
That's what we hope to inspire with every deep dive: a thirst for knowledge, a sense of curiosity, and the tools to navigate the complexities of the world around us.
So as we leave you with this final thought, consider this. What does the future hold for the Afar people? Will they achieve the autonomy they seek? Will they find ways to thrive while preserving their unique heritage? The answers are uncertain, but one thing is clear. Their story is one of resilience, determination, and the enduring power of the human spirit.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another exploration of the fascinating and sometimes challenging realities of our world. So much we've uncovered, but it really does feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, this deep dive, it's given us a good foundation, but there's always more to explore, right?
Always. And I think what strikes me is how this story, the Afar people's struggle,
Yeah.
it connects to these broader global trends, doesn't it?
It really does. You think about indigenous groups all over the world facing these similar challenges, land rights, cultural preservation.
Trying to have a voice in their own future.
Exactly. It's a recurring theme, and it makes the Afar people's story even more relevant, more universal, I think.
Right. It's not just happening in some far corner of the world. It's something we need to be aware of everywhere.
Absolutely. And it makes you think, how do we balance the rights of nations with the rights of these indigenous peoples?
Especially when those traditional territories, those cultural ties, they often cross those borders, right?
Yeah. It's a tough question. And then there's that other challenge. How do we allow for modernization, development, without erasing cultures in the process?
Yeah. How do we progress without losing those unique identities, those ways of life that make our world so diverse?
It's a balancing act, for sure. And these questions, they go way beyond the Horn of Africa, don't they?
Absolutely. They force us to confront some really fundamental issues about power, about justice, about whose voices get heard.
And even with this deep dive, I think it's important to acknowledge our sources, primarily Wikipedia and the RSIDO's own website. They offer valuable insights, but
But it's just one side of the story, right?
exactly, we're hearing primarily from the OFAR perspective, and there are always multiple sides to these complex situations.
It's a good reminder to stay curious, to keep seeking out different perspectives, to challenge our own assumptions.
And that's where you come in, dear listener.
We've given you the tools. Now it's your turn to dig deeper, explore further.
Maybe you'll dive into the history of the Horn of Africa, or research global movements for indigenous rights.
Or maybe you'll get fascinated by the Afar culture itself, their traditions, their music, their art. There's so much to discover.
And that's what these deep dives are all about, sparking that curiosity, giving you the knowledge to navigate this complex world.
So, as we wrap up, one final thought. What does the future hold for the Afar people?
Will they achieve the autonomy they seek? Will they find a way to thrive while holding on to their heritage?
We don't have the answers, but their story, it's a testament to the human spirit, that resilience, that determination to carve out a place in the world.
It's a reminder that even in the face of challenges, there's always hope, always the possibility for change.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more explorations into the fascinating and sometimes challenging realities of our world.